Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I am Princess Iris Monte, your presenter for today. So, this is the continuation of the report of Mr. Aliwalas regarding the gift of the Nile River. So, now we are going to tackle about the society and social classes in ancient Egypt. So, the pharaoh, he is the king. He is considered as the most powerful person in ancient Egypt. So, aside from him, there are four social classes, namely the nobles and the priests, the soldiers, the commoners, and then the slaves. So, now if we're going to visually illustrate it, we can draw, as you can see, a shape of a pyramid. So, at the top, of course, is the pharaoh because he is the king. He is the most powerful person. And under him is the four social classes, the nobles and the priests, the soldiers, the commoners, and lastly, at the very bottom are the slaves. So now, so since Pharaoh is at the top, of course he is at the top because he is the king. He is the king of ancient Egypt. He had control, or he had the control on all laws and armies, which made him the most powerful person in ancient Egyptian society. Also, ancient Egyptians considered the pharaoh as one of their gods. That is why he had a strong religious authority over the citizens. Okay, so under the pharaoh are the nobles and the priests. So the nobles, they owned vast lands, paid no taxes, but yet enjoyed all the political and social privileges in ancient Egypt. So they were also assigned in various regions in ancient Egypt to ensure that the crops were harvested. And as for the priests, they also owned properties and lands, and they acted in Pharaoh's place to run all the temples and infrastructures in ancient Egypt. So they acted in Pharaoh's place to offer sacrifices or offer rituals such as sacrificing foods, clothes, and many more things. So, so it is to ensure that their gods are delighted and would bring abundance to them. Okay, so next are the soldiers. So like nobles, they also paid no taxes to the government. But then, they enjoyed all the privileges in the ancient Egypt because their main function was to fight the enemies of Egypt because back then, it is the basis of taxation is not the income of a person, but their contribution to their society. And of course, soldiers, they fight for Egypt. So they are not obliged to, to shoulder the taxation. Under the soldiers are the commoners. So these commoners are farmers, fishers, the artisans, or the laborers. So these people owned no land but they bore the heavy burden of taxation, and they were used by the pharaoh to build infrastructures like or monuments like the pyramids, the obelisks, and the monoliths. So at the very bottom are the slaves. So these people were usually those who had been captured in war or who had sold themselves into slavery to pay off a family debt. So they have no power and at the mercy of their masters. So they are just basically considered as just things that will do everything that their masters would say. So as we can see in our paradigm, in our illustrations, those people who are the most powerful are few in number, but yet they are at the top of the pyramid. They were at the top of our paradigm. While those people who had little to no power, they were high in number, but then they were at the bottom. So that is our first question. So why do you think those normal people, those slaves are at the bottom and they were high in number, while those people, the most powerful people in the society, are always at the top? So in addition, ancient Egyptian society practiced caste system. So it is wherein if you were born into a specific social class, you will remain in that social class for the entirety of your life until you die. So the ancient Egyptians practiced this because, of course, if you were born, if your parents were slaves, you will be practically a slaves as well, and the rest of your bloodline would be slaves as well. You will be all slaves until the day you die. And of course, if you had royal blood, if you were the pharaoh, the bloodline of yours will remain at the top because you are the royal blood. So that is caste system. The ancient Egypt practiced it. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide, which is the government and politics of ancient Egypt. So ancient Egypt had a theocratic monarchy form of government. So when we say theocracy, it is a system of government in which priests rule in the name of God. So it is also the union of the church and the state. While when we say monarchy, it is a form of government wherein the monarchs rule the whole society, or the royal blood, royal family rule the whole society. So the pharaoh was regarded as a god, as and his power were absolute, as he is considered as the living god, as well as the chief priest of ancient Egypt, and that the rules that he make or the rules that he made was the rule of God. And just like any other monarchy, the pharaoh appointed his family, or relatives, and his favorites to the high positions in the government. And when we say monarchy, it has a, what we call this, an interconnection to religion, or to the God itself, because because of course, as what I've mentioned, the ancient Egyptians considered the pharaoh as their god. So that is why they followed the rules of their pharaoh, because they considered him as the god. So next is the religions, gods and goddesses of ancient Egypt. So as we can see, here are Ra, the god of the sun, Osiris, the god of the Nile River, and Isis, the god of healing, Thoth, god of wisdom, and Ma'at, the god of justice, Nat, the goddess of sky rather, and Ta, the goddess of labor, or the god of labor. So they were the gods and goddesses of ancient Egypt. So they were considered by the ancient Egyptians in belief of giving them fortune or misfortune if ever they disobey the rulings of their gods and goddesses. So they worship their gods through praying in temples every day in the form of rituals such as offering foods, drinks, and clothing. Next are the sacred animals of ancient Egypt. So the Egyptian or ancient Egyptians believed that some animals were sacred, such as beetle, dog, cat, crocodile, falcon, and bull. So the beetle was believed to be the emblem of life, and the falcon was the symbol of royal power. So it said there that cat is also considered as the sacred animals. So that is why they built a monolith, which is a sphinx, which is in the form of cat. So according to them, it is built to protect the pyramids of the Giza. So let's move on to the next slide, which is the burial customs of ancient Egypt. So because of their belief in future life, the ancient Egyptians took great care of their dead before the burial. And before the burial, the corpse was bathed, embalmed, wrapped tightly in fine linen, and the embalmed corpse is called the mummy. So I suppose that we are all familiar with mummy, right? Because it has been a reference to many horror movies, but it originated in ancient Egypt. So, when the pharaoh died, his body was entombed, or his mummy was entombed in the pyramids. So, so that is why the pyramid serves as the reminder of the ancient Egyptians' glorification of life after death. So food, wines, clothes, jewelries, weapons, and even slaves, a human being, were buried with the dead pharaoh. Because the ancient Egyptians firmly believed that he would need this in the afterlife. So the pyramid, according to them, must not be opened again if the mummy of the pharaoh was buried there. Because according to them, whoever touches the tomb of the pharaoh will experience the curse and will hunt on whoever touches it. So here are the examples of mummy. So as we can see, they are covered in fine linen and then put in a casket, and then they were entombed in the pyramids. So usually these rituals were only practiced by the pharaoh because they were considered as god, as what I have mentioned. So those nobles and any other people that belong in other social classes were not going to experience this because they are not the pharaoh. They are not considered as, or they are not considered as special to be able to practice this. Okay, so next is the Egyptian writing, which is hieroglyphics. So as we can see here in our example, as what Mr. Kenneth G said in his last meeting, we can see the symbolism of air, sea waves, birds, or even human beings. So they really base the writing system into what is presented in their environment, which is I think is a very clever method because they were able to come up into a writing system just by observing the surroundings in their area. So have you ever wondered how humans transcribe and eventually comprehend or understand hieroglyphics? So for so many centuries, no one can ever decipher the writing system of Egypt. And in 1799, the soldiers of Napoleon Bonaparte's army that were assigned in Rosetta village in Egypt, they found a black stone almost 4 feet long containing inscription of Egyptian and Greece languages. So this stone is called the Rosetta Stone, and for the first time in 1892, a scholar named John Champollion were able to decipher, or he succeeded in deciphering what was written in that stone, and he discovered that it was hieroglyphics. So that paved the way to the discovery of the glorious civilization of ancient Egypt. And in addition, this stone was put in the British Museum in present day because the back then they won over the Roman Empire, which is where the ancient Egypt belonged. Okay, so let's move on to the education in ancient Egypt. So in ancient Egypt, the temple schools of the priests were only open to the sons of wealthy families, and the subjects taught were reading, writing, religion, arithmetic, and astronomy. So, so the priest teacher dictated the daily lessons to the pupils, and then they would copy it word for word, then memorize it. Also, school discipline back then in ancient Egypt was very strict as pupils were whipped to make them study hard. So as we can see, there is a very unequal society in ancient Egypt. Only those fortunate ones, were able to have the opportunity to go to school, to have a proper education. And those And those people who are unprivileged and unfortunate, they don't have the opportunity to be at that institution, which which is the major factor why they had caste system, because only those people who can afford it can have the opportunity to go to school and then rise to their status as a human being. Well, those people who can't afford it will remain in their class because they don't have the means to be at that school and to rise. They don't have the opportunity to have the ladder to rise at the top, to climb at the top. So that's why they remained in their social classes. So next is the literature of ancient Egypt. So the oldest known Egyptian literature are the pyramid texts, which is literally the inscription on the walls of the pyramid. So they were prayers, hymns, and tale of romance. So other literary works of ancient Egypt were the Book of the Dead that were used by the ancient Egyptians to help the souls of the deceased find their way or be reunited to the god of the dead, which is Osiris. And another one is the Hymn to the Sun, which is an ode created by the Pharaoh Akhenaten. So next are the arts and architecture of ancient Egypt. So as we can see here in our example, we can see the ruins of the temple of Luxor in Egypt. So the glory of Egyptian writing was architecture. The ancient Egyptians were considered as the world's first great builders. So they built magnificent structures that ruins can still be seen up to this day. So these ruins can be located in Karnak, Luxor, and other cities of Egypt. They also excelled in building pyramids to the extent that up until now, given our technologies, the creation of pyramids is still unidentified how exactly it was built. Because it is nearly impossible for a slave who is, we can assume that is malnourished because they are slaves, or even a group of slaves to pull up a block of stone weighing 2.5 tons, if I'm not mistaken, and then put it ascendingly in one another, ascendingly from the bottom to the top. So it is nearly impossible to put it together like that. And aside from the temples and the pyramids, they also built two monoliths of granite, and one of these is what I have mentioned earlier, is the Sphinx, which is, according to them, was built to guard the Pyramid of Giza. And here are the examples of pyramids and the Sphinx. So as we can see, these are the blocks of stone that I am saying. So compared to the normal person, so it is really nearly impossible for a normal person or even a group of people without machine and manually put it together ascendingly like that. So it is still, so the creation of pyramid is still very arguable topic. And to the right is the example of the Sphinx, which is in the form of a cat. So next is the sciences of ancient Egypt. So the achievement in science of the ancient Egyptian. So first is the ancient Egyptians knew mathematics, especially arithmetic and geometry, the use of calendar, the usage of medicine and surgery, and the invention of water clock. So the ancient Egyptians learned geometry because of the annual flood of the Nile River. So this flood erased land boundaries of the landowners. So they had to create a formula or a method that will measure fairly the lands, or measure the lands fairly for the landowners to have a fair part of their lands. So that created geometry, which also enabled them to build huge infrastructures like pyramids and Sphinx and others. So another Egyptian achievement was the use of the calendar. So from their study of the moon, sun, and stars, they devised the first calendar in history. So the year was divided into 12 lunar months that has 30 days each and then 365 days a year. So next is the usage of medicine and surgery. So the ancient Egyptians knew about surgeries and medicine. So which they blended it with their superstitious beliefs, and then they knew about the 48 cases of clinical surgery from the oldest document on medicine, which named Smith papyrus. So also their embalming method was still remained unsurpassed to this day because the chemical that they used to embalm the corpse was still yet to discover. So next is the invention of water clock. So the ancient Egyptians invented water clock to measure time, which became the first water clock or the first known water clock in history. Let's move on to the Egypt's contribution to civilization. So ancient Egyptians gave the world the pyramids, erected magnificent places, obelisks rather, and temples of granite and stones, devised the first 365-day calendar, produced the first sea-going ship made of papyrus reeds, first people to develop geometry, increased the man's knowledge of medicine, of surgery, and embalming, and the sundial or the invention of sundial and water clock. So to wrap up this report, I have here a quotation. A people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. By Marcus Jervy. So that's all everyone. Thank you for listening.